So the handle material we're going to be using on this knife is actually dyed giraffe bone. I think we're going to use this side. I like the looks of it better. And this knife build is for a dear friend of mine, Jeff Becker. And we're going to put the best of the best products with it. These come from Jantz Knife Supply. Very sought after, very expensive handles. Very nice. My favorite, one of my favorite. Okay, like I said, we're using giraffe bone that's been dyed for the handles, and I'm gonna thin these down with a mill. You can sand them down using hand tools, sanders, but I utilize my milling machine. I'm very blessed to have it, so it's probably gonna get noisy. I'll try to reduce the noise as much as possible, but let me get you zoomed in. And we're just reducing the material down a little thinner so we don't have to sand it as much. And I'm going to vacuum as well. We've already took one strip about 100 thousandths thick off of it, so you get this angled where it won't ram into it. About right there. All right, here we go. To glue up our handle material. Giraffe bone. This is the side that will be out. It's beautiful stuff. We've got it thinned down using G-Flex epoxy, 2-part 1-to-1 epoxy, and we'll go ahead and get started mixing our epoxy. Here's our scales. I've already acetoned and cleaned them really good, and cleaned the inside of these. That's critical to making them stick good. This is the way that I mix my epoxy. I can pretty much eyeball the 2 parts equally. Like I said, this is the way I do it. It's not necessarily a tutorial. It's just the way I do my glue ups for knife scales. All right, you want to make sure you got at least equal or a little bit more hardener. This stuff doesn't harden for, this is actually 30-minute epoxy, so we're not in no big rush. And it's a really good product for hand-making knives. Waterproof, just a really good product. So we're gonna mix it up real good. I'm gonna spend at least a couple of minutes really getting it thoroughly mixed up, and I'll bring you right back here in just a minute. All right, we've got our epoxy mixed up good, and what I like to do is put a thin layer onto the scale itself when I'm dealing with these giraffe bone scales, and make sure you get the whole thing coated with a thin layer. And also, I didn't show it on camera, but I used 100 grit sandpaper to rough these up on top of our surface granite block over there, and made sure they were flat after we milled them out. You can see I probably mixed up too much epoxy here, but it's better to have more than what you need and not enough when you go to glue this up. I used to put epoxy on the metal and the scales. I found that is not necessary. I was actually putting too much on the scale. So I've got these laying side up because I didn't want them to get any debris on them. I'm gonna go ahead and look at the area where I want that. I want it on that side. I want it right there in the middle on this side. So I will lay that there and let that settle for just a minute, and we'll get them clamped here in just a minute. All right, you can see what I'm doing, spreading this on. I'm gonna come back to you in just a minute with that. We've got them both laying on the epoxied scales. I usually twist them around a little bit, make sure it's got glue all over. And now we want to put our clamps on here. And you know, you don't have to clamp them super tight. I've got these smaller clamps. They're pretty doggone strong. One thing you got to watch for when you're clamping this together, this epoxy is slick, and it will actually want to float, move around when you clamp it down. And as you can see, we don't have a whole lot of room for air on the edges at the wide part of the scale. So I'm going to start clamping at the wide part to make sure. And don't worry, when it squirts out, we're going to end up having to grind it off later and sand it off later anyway. Now, I've used quite a bit of epoxy. You can see it squeezing through the holes, the pinholes. It's not a problem. We'll take it off later. I want to always make sure and get these things seated really good. Get these clamps on here good. Generally put one in the middle as well. And then you want to watch that because sometimes they'll move around. This one's not moving, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and lay it down so there's no pressure on it. Again, you can see the epoxy squeezing up through the hole. That's not anything to worry about. We'll deal with that later. It's better that you've got glue all over the surface of the liner. Go ahead and clamp this bottom. That one's wanting to move on me. Slide it over just a little. You get the idea. I've got one more clamp I've got to find, and I'll get back with you on the next step shortly.